Welcome back to Nimble Youth, the podcast where we explore the emotional lives of children and teens and help parents better understand the challenges young people face today. I'm your host, Matt Butterman. Today we're talking about something that many young people experience, but often struggle to put into words: loneliness. In recent years, loneliness has increasingly been recognized not just as an emotional state, but as a public health concern. In fact, former U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy issued an advisory describing loneliness as a widespread issue affecting millions of Americans, with risks to both mental and physical health comparable to well-known health challenges such as smoking and obesity. And for teens and young adults, loneliness can be especially complex. They may be surrounded by peers, connected digitally 24 hours a day, and yet still feel profoundly isolated. My guest today is Lucy Rose, founder of the Cost of Loneliness Project, an organization dedicated to raising awareness about the emotional, social, and societal impacts of loneliness and helping individuals better understand how meaningful connection can improve well-being. Lucy, welcome to Nimble Youth.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So loneliness is something that most people have experienced at some point in their lives, but many people don't really understand what it is fully. And so how would you define loneliness?
You know, it's obviously a great question. And I want to be really clear that as we go forward today, I want to differentiate between loneliness and chronic loneliness, because to your point, we've all felt like, we wore the wrong clothes to a dance. And so we stood by ourselves, being a little uncomfortable. That's lonely. Yeah. Lonely that night. But what we're talking about, you and me today, as we think about this is chronic loneliness, that feeling, and it's an emotional feeling, really, that we get when we don't, over the long term, when we don't feel like we really belong or we're not seen. It's kind of that gap between what we feel like we need inside to feel seen and belonging, the gap between what we need and what we believe we actually have. And that's really important to think about that again from a chronic loneliness standpoint, because it's a signal that we have. It's not a negative in and of itself, but a signal that we need to do a different approach to connection because we're missing something.
Yeah. And so I guess that begs the question, is loneliness just about being alone, or is it about just feeling disconnected, even when others are present in the room?
Matt, it's really about feeling alone, and it has nothing to do with how many people are in the room. There are people who sit at Thanksgiving in our country at a table full of family and feel really alone. There are people who sit in a room full of coworkers and feel alone. And there are people who can sit alone and not feel lonely, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, yeah.
Fulfilling the need each person has on an individual basis of what they need to feel comfortable and like they belong and are seen and heard. Yeah.
Right. So there's growing and well-founded concern that loneliness is increasing among teens and young adults. And many observers point to a combination of factors, things like social media, and then academic pressure, reduced unstructured social time, and perhaps most importantly, the lingering effects from pandemic era isolation. COVID was certainly a kind of real life experiment in what happens when we are completely isolated from each other and devoid of in-person, social interaction. So what factors do you think are contributing to the trend?
I think you named many of them, right?
Right.
It's really interesting, I think, when we think about our online work, be it watching reels on TikTok or be it chatting with our friends after school, whatever that means. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it? Because in a world where things seem to the outside to be the most connected we've ever been, the paradox is that in some ways, has left us without what we really need, which is human connection. I think as we think about things like AI and we think about all the time we spend online, and in fact, if teens would just 3 hours or more online a day actually increases their chances of getting major depression and other things as well. But as we think about this paradox, that is a good thing, perhaps, to continue relationships that have already been developed, that touch point, touch base with our friends. It's not the best way, clearly, to develop relationships or a connection where we need all 5 senses to really be a part of that and feel like we are seen and belong again. Yeah. And all of these things are contributing. I think COVID, in its own paradoxical way, too, is a wake-up call, wasn't it? Because we all suddenly went, whoa, this does matter. We're seeing our children when they're not in school suffer because that teen time, as we're talking about today, is one of the times they need friends the most in life, as you know. They are growing, their hormones are changing, their brains are maturing, they're trying to figure out their own feelings. They need that desperately. So COVID, I think, was a wake-up call in that way as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
And digging a little deeper into the digital connection issue. So young people today, they're more digitally connected than any generation before them. And yet many report feeling more isolated. And that's the paradox that you referenced, the paradox of cyber age technology. We're more connected than ever before. And yet at the same time, perhaps the most isolated we've ever been as a society writ large. So can you explore kind of what's the difference between online connection and then connection in real life?
Again, for me at least, and studies have shown too, so it's not just my thinking about this, we need all 5 senses to effectively and authentically connect. And the connections we're talking about now are reciprocal connections. They are, I share some of my deepest thoughts with you, you share them with me. They're people with whom we feel comfortable and safe to share the things that are most important to us. Doing that in a way that we can give somebody a hug when they need it, and we can shake their hand if they need it. We can actually look them directly in the eye, which you probably have read and know, but maybe not everybody listening will know. You cannot effectively do online.
Mm-hmm.
We get close to that, but you and I are not looking at each other's eyes right this minute.
Exactly.
Because we may try.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
So that kinesthetic and the visual and the auditory, all of that stuff, those 5 senses are vital to a legitimate, authentic kind of connection. And unfortunately, it just can't happen online. I think, again, it's probably a great thing to help us now that you and I have met. And once we get to know one another better, following up on Zoom may be a great thing. It's not going to build the kind of connections we need. And we know that 1 in 4 teens claims to be lonely. They're willing to say they are lonely in surveys. So there are a lot of folks out there that need more than simply this. You need a best friend. You need someone with whom you feel safe and can talk.
Right. You bring up a very important point, and that is there's so much communication that is, in fact, nonverbal. Just being in someone's presence is just so important, I think,
so
many times. Yeah.
So important. And, even things like a hug, I think about that often because I know not everybody is, and that's absolutely fine too.
Right.
But for those who are, there's nothing that replaces that feeling of safety when someone gives you that big bear hug.
Exactly.
You and I can't do that today. We can try to fist bump.
That's right.
We'll do something, but that's not going to really happen with that. Yeah, we'll do that, and I'll take it off. It's not the same. It won't take the place of when we actually meet and be able to hug one another, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
critical. The other piece here is that most of these teens aren't necessarily going to say, I'm lonely. They won't use that terminology.
Right.
We have to figure it out and help them also because there are lots of reasons they don't say it. But
I mean, I think it's just the vulnerability, sort of open them up to, I guess, the embarrassment about, about feeling lonely. I think
our society says you can do it by yourself. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Right, exactly.
Dad, come on, you can handle that yourself.
Right.
So when you grow up learning that, then why would you say it? Plus, you don't necessarily, as a teen, have the language, the feeling language to even say it.
Right.
You feel like loser if you're not.
Right. Exactly.
1 in 4 will say they're lonely. Many more than that probably really are. And again, it's not the good news here is all it is a sign, truly, that you do need to find more connections that make you feel more whole. There's nothing negative about being lonely in any way, shape, or fashion.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the downsides of our sort of individualistic, solipsistic existence in the U.S. I think in particular, we're all rugged individuals here and not necessarily often part of a collective. And especially these days when it seems like we're being.
Especially these days, but we have to change that culture, Matt. That's my secret. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Culture, create a movement, one person at a time, to help us move from that concept of independence that you said to the understanding of interdependence and how everything we do as a species is based on that, just like not all, but most species of animals. It's about interdependence in mammals, at least,
Exactly, for sure. And that leads nicely into my next topic I want to talk about, and that's the emotional and physical cost of loneliness. And there are definite costs to it because loneliness doesn't just feel painful. It can also affect mental health in very significant ways. And many studies have linked loneliness with an increased risk of anxiety and depression, as well as things like lower self-esteem and reduced resilience, which is a topic we cover here on this podcast a lot. And your website also says this, which I think is very important. It says that loneliness is to suicide, addiction, bullying, obesity, gastrointestinal disease, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hematological conditions, and more, as poor hygiene is to infection, which is a powerful analogy and I think very appropriate. There are physical somatic costs that we bear to being lonely, chronically lonely anyway. But focusing on the behavioral aspects, what are some of the emotional effects you see associated with chronic loneliness?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I do want to address some of the physical things as well, so
Sure.
we understand. But as we get to, as we talk emotional, the two aspects to that, I think. One is how, if you're a parent, how do you recognize that your teen might be lonely? Because they're probably not going to come to you and say, I'm lonely.
Right.
And when you think about the emotional pieces they may exhibit that we can pick up on as parents are things like they may seem more stressed or more anxious than they have in the past. Their grades may drop from a B to a C and they don't seem to be as interested anymore. They may kind of not be interested in going to their sports activities they were doing. You might see they're not calling or nowadays, I guess, texting their best friend as much anymore. You begin to see behavioral changes. I hope that we can recognize this before because, prevention's free in this
Right.
world,
Yep.
and we don't have to take a drug. We don't have to do anything. We just need to be aware, and look and be thoughtful. And so as we think about the other piece to this is sleep. Often it shows up and either they are sleeping more than normal. They just don't want to get out of bed, or they're not getting enough sleep because they're, lonely and it's impacting their sleep. And that becomes a vicious cycle. Because when you don't get enough sleep, you also have trouble connecting. And so that I want to pause just right here for 1 second and make sure that we know if, in fact, a parent thinks that their child has gone from just being lonely, and I don't mean just as in minimizing the impact of loneliness, but if they feel like they may have tipped over into depression, it is really important to recognize that and get them the professional help they may need. So I want to take
Absolutely.
that little pause there and make sure everybody's aware of that. Because that can happen, to your point, if not detected early enough. If the teen is not connecting properly, they certainly could go there. That could be one of the results.
Right. Yeah, it's one of our common themes here as well. Is just,
Okay.
address things early on. And most importantly, just address things, and don't let them fester and become real huge
Well,
problems.
it's easy to let that fester because, again, a lot of people are uncomfortable saying I'm lonely. That just sounds like, oh my gosh, I can't say I'm whining.
Right.
It's not real. Well,
Right.
it's real. And
Yep.
it's a sign. And it's something that we can collectively do something about. Our
Right.
teachers, our physicians, the way we design our towns, our schools, we can do something to be supportive. Yeah.
Absolutely. So adolescence is already a time when identity is forming and social belonging feels incredibly important, as we've kind of alluded to already in our conversation. Emotions are especially intense during that period of life. But why might loneliness feel particularly intense during teenage years?
Oh, my heart feels for a teenager right now as I think about it. It's a tough time in life for I guess everybody listening to the podcast will either be one or has been one. So we all know, we are working with friends. We're trying to find friends. We're trying to figure out what's cool and what's not cool. Academics are hard these days and our expectations are high. It's hard if you are a college-bound student. It's hard to think about, how do I get admitted to college? There are so many aspects. How do I deal with TikTok and social media? And, frankly, all that gets put up there are the things that are positive for most of our teens. And how can I live up to, all of these things everybody else seems to be doing and maybe I'm not? They're just pressures coming from every place and they're developing as well. Hormones are beginning to come into their play here and their bodies are changing as well as their emotions as they're dealing with all of this. So it's a tough time. It's no wonder that 1 out of 4, probably many more than that actually, feel somewhat lonely through isolation or other things for themselves as they kind of try to navigate all of this.
Yeah, for sure. So for our
And
parents, I'm sorry, go ahead.
this starts much earlier. Sometimes we see this starting in elementary school or even younger and continuing through adolescence. And so that can be even harder when you've been that way for a very long time. Sorry to interrupt you, Matt.
No, quite all right. I was just going to say, for our parents listening, loneliness can sometimes be difficult to detect. We just had a conversation the other day with another guest, and we were talking about the issues of communication between teens and parents. And so for parents, it can be hard to determine, what's going on with their teenager sometime, because a teenager, they can appear busy and socially active and yet still feel completely disconnected. So what are some of the signs that might indicate that a young person is struggling with loneliness?
Well, you are so right. This is a very individual situation we're talking about here. Two people that look very similar, who are members of the same sports club, who seem to run in the same group of friends and all that, might be experiencing this totally differently, 180 degrees different. One feels very comfortable in there and the other not. And again, I would go back to what we're looking for. And you opened the door to a whole lot of answers there, because, we need, I think, as parents, the most important thing we can do is to listen. To be sensitive, to watch, to see if things are happening, like, again, grades are dropping or they're not as active with their friends as they have been before. They seem to stay home more than they used to, or their sleep has been impacted. There's several things we can look for, and we can build rituals into our own families' lives that, help teens, I think, feel comfortable with that and create more safety with us as well through our own listening. Sometimes even just sitting side by side to someone instead of face to face can actually give them a better feeling about safety in terms of sharing. But I think if I'm a parent, we're going to be looking for, again, the sleep change, the interaction with other students or other friends. Do they have that? Has that changed? Grades, things like that.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about perhaps the biggest antidote to loneliness, which is building connection. And in most cases, this is in-person, embodied connection with other people. And the good news is that these connections can be built. I think one disturbing trend or concerning trend recently is that, children they're not competing in organized sports as much. They're just not getting into groups, participation in whatever church groups or social clubs, has gone down. One way I like to build connection is, sing in a choir. And that's a way to, express yourself individually, but as part of a whole. And I feel a lot of connection when I do that, because I have to, blend with the person next to me. I have to, we're all, it's a tremendous feeling, because we're all working towards a collective whole, and we're all individuals. We come from different walks of life. So I think that's a very powerful thing to be involved with, because not everybody is athletic, and but just doing something, whatever it is, whether it's artistic, whether it's athletic or social, doing it in a group, someplace you have to go to, almost like a ritual every week, right? I think those are very important things for building connection. But what are your thoughts on how young people can move forward from isolation and towards connection?
There are a lot of things we need to think about. I love yours, by the way, because you also have to sing in harmony. So it also makes you aware of the people around you, I think, as well, doesn't it? So that's kind of a cool thing. Similar to sports and similar to theater and things like that.
Right.
Here's the thing. It's critically important, clearly, that a young person find at least a few people with whom, and maybe even just one, but someone with whom they feel so safe and comfortable they can share their innermost thoughts and fears. There are lots of ways to do that. Not every young person is going to say, I want to be an athlete or I want to sing in a choir. Those are great things. Finding a sense of purpose that you love and following that and doing it in a group with others is certainly a beautiful way to do it. Finding something that you love, be it hiking or theater or sports, to your point, or singing or any of these things. I know you were a bicyclist and enjoy bicycles.
Right.
A biking club. There are lots of things. If a person feels comfortable doing that, that is a wonderful entree into natural community. Most important thing to me is that we don't try to force something on someone that they don't want to do or aren't comfortable. And sometimes it takes courage for a young person, especially again in adolescence where this is hard anyway, darn it. If you're not naturally on a football team, then how else do I get involved? So sometimes it's one step at a time. It's saying hi to somebody you've never said hi to in the hall.
Yeah.
It's with someone who's sitting alone in the cafeteria and saying, hi, I'm Lucy. How are you today? And just beginning to kind of get our feet wet and our toes wet. And as parents, of course, if we know what they're interested in, we can help facilitate or encourage or whatever them being able to get there on time if they don't drive yet, if they're young adolescent or whatever. But I think, and never underestimate the small stuff, like, asking someone how they're doing and actually really meaning it. In our society, it's all about, hey, how are you? Fine, thanks. How are you? That's almost like a password for the day, or hello, how are you? Good morning. Actually asking and listening. And that's one thing too that most young people could do, is look at someone else and say, how are you today? And spend the time just to listen. So there are a lot of ways, but I think finding a passion, a sense of purpose, going into that with others is a beautiful way, if that's comfortable for you.
For sure. So let's talk about your organization, which is the Cost of Loneliness Project. And it focuses on raising awareness and fostering conversation about this issue, which is a very important issue today. How did you, what led you to found the organization, and what are your goals, and how do you think it's helping the situation?
Well, I was lonely and I didn't realize I was lonely, quite honestly. And I think that sneaks up on a lot of us, right? I traveled 6 days a week for 20 years. I was on the road as a professional consultant. And I realized that, how in the heck do you build friendships like that, Matt?
Right.
When you're on the road, how do you join a choir? How do you even watch a TV show that's a series?
Exactly.
None of that.
Yeah.
So as I realized the impact it was having on me, I gained a lot of weight. I wasn't sleeping at night. All the kind of symptoms fell in place. And I said I was. And as I began then to research how in the world somebody is outgoing and connecting and all that as I am could get that way, I started doing research and realized that, man, was I not alone, by the way, with that, to use a play on words. There were a whole lot of people alone. This was about 8-9 years ago, before COVID. There were a whole lot of people that felt lonely. And as I started looking at the real impacts, and you touched on the physical by naming a lot, but just how that happens is when we're chronically lonely, we actually produce constantly the same hormones that you do when you have fright and flight. Okay, so like if you're scared to death, and the impact of physical and emotional, your body really can't tell the difference between being scared to death and being lonely, because it's the same hormone.
Yep.
That causes inflammation, which is what actually causes all those things that you talked about, from heart disease to GI to even potentially dementia. And so all those things are a piece. And as I started realizing all of that, I went, man, I know what I want to do is my passion work for the rest of my life. And that's to help educate others so they don't have to suffer in the same way, that this is a national crisis that we need to deal with. So I started this project, and I call it the Cost of Loneliness, because of the actual dollar costs for all the things we just mentioned, but also the cost on each of us individually and what it may mean to us.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we're about education. We're about raising awareness, but frankly, we're really about doing something about it as well. We're working on trying to increase infrastructures in this country through things like teachers and physicians and architects and city planners, and trying to help us move to a culture, as we said, of interdependence in a very authentic and caring way.
For sure. Yeah. So as we wrap up our conversation, I keep thinking about something very simple, but very powerful. Loneliness, and you've certainly addressed this in the conversation, loneliness is not a personal failure. Loneliness is human experience. And and often it's a signal, not that something's wrong with the individual, but that something in their environment, relationships, or expectation needs attention and care. And connection doesn't always come quickly, but these small moments, these small conversations that you talked about, these small acts of reaching out and connecting, these very small steps can change the story in a big way. So before we close, is there one final takeaway that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I think you just summed it up beautifully. Those are all my takeaways, but I just want to reiterate what you just said. This is not a personal failure. It is a human experience that all of us at some point in time in our lives probably feel to one degree or another. It is a signal that we can, ourselves, our inner selves need more in terms of connection. And it's really like a vital sign. This concept is every bit as important, frankly, as blood pressure and pulse, telling us we need something. And if we could think about this every bit as much as we think about going to the gym and pumping ourselves up physically, that connection that we have with others is vital for ourselves and for all the people with whom we interact. So it's up to you and me, and it's up to all of us to collectively find those connections and help create those for everybody, I think, with whom we come in contact.
Yeah, I like that analogy. We have to kind of exercise our social interactions, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
It's free. It's free.
Exactly.
It's picking up the phone and calling somebody. It's sending someone a postcard that they haven't heard from. There's so many. It's asking a question and listening quietly for a real answer, and then engaging in a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my guest today has been Lucy Rose, founder of the Cost of Loneliness Project, which is dedicated to raising awareness about the impact of loneliness and promoting healthier forms of connection. And you can find out more about their work at thecostofloneliness.org. And we'll have that link in our show notes for this episode. And if today's conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with a friend, and don't forget to rate and review Nimble Youth on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your support helps us continue these important conversations about youth mental health. Until next time, remember, connection doesn't require perfection. It simply requires presence. I'm Matt Butterman. This is Nimble Youth. We'll see you next time. Good. Yes. Excellent. I think that was perfect length, like right at 30 minutes. Yeah.